Brandon Sutton, he's host of The Discourse. Everybody become a patron immediately. It's one of the best podcasts in the game. You're also going to be with us February 7th. Get your tickets at the Bell House. How excited are you for the show, man?
I'm very excited. Obviously it's your show, so I won't be the center of attention, but I'm excited to be there nonetheless.
You will be a center of attention.
That's only because of my mass.
No, I'm a conduit. I'm a conduit, man. The center of attention goes out to all the great guests like you.
That's great. That's a great way of looking at it.
Absolutely. Figured you'd enjoy it as a narcissist. Brandon, we talked about this. Do you think, obviously there's still the, literally whitewashed and sanitized MLK of cable news and everything. But do you think that we're making headway, at least for some, groups of the population to actually be reminded and understand, no, this was actually a serious political radical?
When it comes to Martin Luther King Jr.?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when you look at the younger black and brown people who are, turning out to vote, turning out to become involved in politics at the local and at the national level, you're seeing reckoning with not only their own material conditions, like their own poverty, their own interactions with race, their own interactions with the state and violence of the state, but also I'd say a reflection on the discrepancy between the history of black figures and the whitewashed view of black radicals, MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., and the lesser known ones too, and the sanitized version, right? The version that we are presented in high school, in middle school, in college sometimes, and especially online on the one day of year where you have to be nice to black people. Well, MLK Junior Day and also the NBA Finals, you have to be nice to black people.
Right.
Nice to black people.
Yeah, definitely, right.
And so, I think that people have become...
And in both cases, they go, it was a great effort.
Yeah, you win some, you lose some.
You win some, you lose some.
But, and that's
so fucked up.
That is heartening. You love seeing people, reckon with their own genealogy of, black thought. Obviously the concept, not the canon of academia, and the concept, not like the rapper from fucking The Roots. But, at the same time, you want people to not, especially black people, to not be held to the imaginary standards or just the real standards of Martin Luther King Jr., right? We know where he was in the 60s. We know where he was in the 50s. We know where he was when he died. But we've had an intervening 50 years to develop ideas to look back on that past and say, okay, well, here's what I think he had wrong. Here's what I think he had right. Here's what we can learn. Here's how we can synthesize the new reality. And here's what we have to leave in the past. And so I think for a lot of people, when it comes to MLK Day, people try to transpose Martin Luther King Jr.'s in 1960s onto the present day and say, here's what he would be doing now. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to do that because we know what he was doing then. You can't say, you can say, here's who he would be most likely to find himself politically aligned or in terms of candidates, but we don't know where he would be. But here's what we can say. We can say, well,
I think Pete Buttigieg offers a temperament and moderation. Joe Biden, come on, man. I endorse Joe.
I would pay money to hear Joe Biden recount the history of Martin Luther King Jr. I would pay. There are two things I would pay money to hear Joe Biden do, and I guess both are kind of topical given the time of year. But explain the 7 days of Kwanzaa and Martin Luther King Jr. I want my vehicle into that to be Joe Biden's rambling explanation.
I think it's time for that drop, Matt.
Oh, yeah, come on, man.
That's Joe Biden's response to your proposition.
It's a trick question.
Come on, man. Kwanzaa's a trick question.
It is.
Did you ever actually read Bruce Dixon's writing on the guy who created Kwanzaa?
I have not, but I will say this. I'm pretty sure if you were to ask Joe Biden, he would just say it's like what Lenny Kravitz celebrates.
If you can remember who Lenny Kravitz is. So, so to making MLK actually, but that's interesting because if you actually make him an actual political leader and intellectual, which he was, and I would argue also clearly some type of spiritual theological figure, but that makes him actually alive. And then you can contend with him, which is treating him properly, not some type of weird museum piece or proxy for other people's contemporary politics.
Exactly. You can use him. You can, treat him like a real person, somebody who was in conversation with his own politics and in conversation with the politics of the time, and someone who showed like self-doubt. We know at the time when he was assassinated, he was in many ways grappling with the idea of nonviolence, for one example, like grappling with the viability of nonviolence when it comes to organizing, for liberation, Black liberation, and he was also organizing along class lines too. Like, I think that people point out rightfully that a large part of Martin Luther King Jr.'s, like the canon of his life, the trajectory of his life, was melding an analysis of class and race together, explaining how those two interweave and how liberation of Black people is in many ways rooted in the liberation of them as an economic class. And that kind of gets whitewashed away when we go into the future and goes, okay, well, the March on Washington was a march for racial equality in some sort of vague, overarching way. But what does that actually mean? Like, what does racial equality mean in the context of the March on Washington? What does it mean in the context of Martin Luther King Jr.'s life? What does it mean in the context of the 60s and, in the civil rights era? And, it's sad because even just to be kind of rude, I think, you look at a lot of people who are celebrating Martin Luther King Jr., not just the Republicans, right? Not just the people who obviously would not have been supporting him. But you look at some of the more Democrat-leaning people, the liberals, and you say, hey, we know that part of your own personal mythology, part of the personal mythology of you and the candidates you support is that, like, if you were to be in the 1960s, you would have been on the front lines of the civil rights era. But we know that's not true.
Yeah, we know
that's. It's like we know, like, based on how they react to modern liberation movements, how they react to Black Lives Matter, how they react to Palestine, how they react to any kind of movement by people who are oppressed, in order to like sort of somehow like grapple or, take back power from the state or from, in case of the global South, take back power from America, take back self-agency.
Right. No. And again, of course, like by the end too, I mean, look, when we all know that when he made a class turn, and probably most importantly spoke out against, the, atrocities, the mass murder campaign in Vietnam, he was loathed by the establishment. And of course, we'll do this in the post game, but obviously another culmination of this is, the FBI sending him out a tweet, from presumably from the J. Edgar Hoover Federal Building, the guy who literally tried to get him to commit suicide.
Yeah, I mean, some intern was there, and it was some FBI intern, the Pete Buttigieg of the future, was there, trying to craft the perfect MLK Jr. memoriam tweet, and it was either that or like pick the top 3 emojis that make you want to kill yourself. And
these are the top 3 emojis that J. Edgar Hoover would have sent to MLK if it was today.
Exactly. So I mean, you don't know what he would.
They're still surveilling Black liberation movements today.
They're still they're still. I mean, I don't mind sounding conspiratorial. Like, they're still assassinating Black radicals today. They're like, in many ways, like, the assassination of Black radicals has never really ended. There are basically any note who was involved in the Ferguson protests has died under mysterious circumstances. And so, I mean, the legacy of MLK, and I would say the unfortunate reality of MLK is, along with the whitewashing, he acts sort of as a waypoint in the past for people to point to and say, okay, here's what racism was. Racism was segregation, de jure segregation, redlining, all of those things that were occurring in the past. And now we're here and things are different and racism is gone. But a lot of the things that we were still dealing with in the past have not only stuck around, but they've gotten worse. And they've gotten worse because people, I think, they've gotten worse because the state has gotten more power. It has, solidified, in some ways, its media apparatus has become more solid. It's become more more digital. Its surveillance has become easier, and so now, we're dealing with not only like the same police state, but like on steroids. But we're dealing with people in some ways trying to pretend as though that kind of racism is in the past, because that's where Martin Luther King Jr. is, and that's where we've come so far. But have we? By what standard? And I think people, point to MLK and then they point to Obama and they say, look how far we've come. And it's just like,
have we?
Right. It's just like, have we come that far?
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.